Hello, everyone. My name is Cynthia Quijano, and I'm the Director and Principal Consultant here at Change Differently. Welcome to the webinar. I know a lot of you will be listening into the recording. A lot of what we're going to be talking about today is values. Are you living them, or are they wall decor? So welcome in this pretty sunny Thursday afternoon here in London. And I'm saying pretty sunny because it all of a sudden just started raining a couple of minutes ago. But the sun has come back up. So, yes, today we're going to be talking about values. Now, this is a theme that's really passionate for me because I believe that values are very important in an organization and we do not need to have them as wall decor. But before I get started, let me tell you a little bit about Change Differently. Let me make this big now. There you go. So let me tell you a little bit about Change Differently. So I found the Change Differently towards the end of last year because I had been able to work with different types of organizations for 10 years. So I worked with multinationals, SMEs, and the higher education sector. And what I realized is that more and more organizations needed a bit of help when they were going through this constant process of change. They needed help to look a bit more towards the long term, but also towards how they could create change in a very different way. So the purpose of Change Differently came out of this. And it's basically to help organizations understand and embrace an organizational culture based on employee engagement that drives long-term sustainable business success. So we trust that by putting people first in everything we do, change can be driven faster, better, and create bigger innovations within an organization, whilst enhancing obviously its purpose and the bottom line and performance. So this is how Change Differently started. But today we're going to really talk about values. Now we're going to talk about corporate and organizational values mainly. So these are the ones that we talk about in our strategy, we say are important to us, but many times what happens in organizations is that they are basically just wall decoration or maybe a mouse mat decoration. So nobody really knows what they are, what they mean, or actually even can name them. So I'm going to try to make the session slightly interactive, and I do have a timer with me today because some of the exercises I'm going to actually time. But whether you're listening to this live or you're listening to the recording, I think these exercises are really worth doing. So I want you to take 1 minute, and I want you to describe your organization that you work for in 3 words. Just 3, no more, and begin. For those of you suffering, you only have 30 seconds left. And stop. Great. I want you to hold on to those 3 words. We're going to come back to them later on in the presentation. So let me begin by kind of defining what values are. Well, pretty much they're the how we do things at work. If you look at the Business Dictionary online, what it describes values are is as the operating philosophies or principles that guide an organization's internal conduct, as well as its relationship with its customers, partners, and shareholders. So it is this underlying philosophies and guidelines that kind of say how we do things in the company. So if you really think about values, they're the foundation of an organizational culture. They reflect those underlying assumptions of an organization. So just a bit of a revision, just pulled up Edgar Shane's 3 levels of culture. So these are the things below the iceberg. The things we don't necessarily see, but they kind of give us those basic unconscious beliefs of how we do things. So we have those underlying assumptions, we have espoused values, which I'll talk about in a bit, and we have artifacts, which will be the more visible things like a behavior. So values are really the basis of your culture. And actually, this is one of the things that makes it really important. But before I talk a bit more about that, let's look at the difference between the espoused values and actual values. So espoused values are the ones we as an organization say are really important. So they're usually the 5 to 7 that we write in our strategy and say, these are our corporate values and this is what we're going to work with. These, however, are not always the same as our actual values. The actual values are the ones that are being lived and behaved within the organization. So in an ideal situation, what we'd have is that they'd be the same, but sometimes they are very, very different. So actual values, the way you can say if an espoused value is an actual value is because the behaviors within the organization will match them. So it's actually matching the visible part of the iceberg with the invisible part of the iceberg, and it's kind of making sure that's all coherent and consistent. So yes, ideally these two will match very, very nicely. So because they are part of our culture, they are massively important. We can't really ignore them. And even if our espoused and actual values, even if we have really strong espoused values, but they're not being lived or not actual values, we will have some conflict. So they're important because values obviously underline those behaviors. And behaviors, what behavior does is it drives your culture, but it also drives the performance of an organization. So the better aligned everything is, the more people will perform to a higher performance. When values actually align with individual values, we have this great sense of connection with the organization. So let's say you have a big value of integrity, and that for me is a very strong personal value. So what it creates is a very big connection between the organization and myself, and what it'll create is bigger commitment for me and engagement for me with that organization. So especially when we talk about, for example, the millennials, this is something that really, really is important because they are looking for organizations that give them that coherence between their personal values and the organizational values. However, I do think it's true for some of the other generations as well, so it should not be ignored. And values can actually really help you drive different initiatives within your organization. So they can really help when your organization needs to go through a change process, and it can really help you drive certain initiatives. So values are actually a lot more important than a lot of people realize. So we have another exercise. Oh, wait. Well, there you go. I put a bit of homework so everybody can start thinking. This time what I want you to do is, without cheating, so no looking at Google, not asking your colleague who might be sitting next to you, I want you to take 1 minute and write down your organizational values. So the ones the organization you work for or your own, if it's your own, what are they? From the top of your head. And begin. Thirty seconds left. And stop. Great. Are you missing some? Are you not sure? Are you starting to wonder what I'm going on about? Well, I'm going to give you 2 more minutes. And I want you to go to Google and just check yourself. Check to see if you were correct. Check if you were missing anything. Um, I'll take time again and tell you when to stop. So start. Thirty seconds left. Stop. Great. Now, how many of you missed one or two? How many of you actually maybe got a couple wrong? Um, this is actually quite a good exercise because what it's starting to tell us is that are they being lived? Because actually, one of the first things we need to know is whether people know what our values are or not. So does the rest of the organization know them? Can they name them? Can they say what it means to them in the role? Now, I want to take you back to that first exercise we did. I want you to actually look at the 3 words you used to describe your organization and now at your organizational values. So you should have those 2 things in front of you. Do they match? Are they similar? Do certain things that you described your organization, could they fit into those values? Now, if they do, that's great. It means that they are probably being lived and that you can probably see that within your organization. If for some reason your organizational values and how you described it seem to be a world apart, it probably means that we're having a bit of issues with the are they being lived apart. This is a very short exercise, but it's a good way to actually start thinking about this. Because actually, what this means is maybe not the whole organization knows them. And it's not just about naming them. That doesn't always have to be like for like. So maybe if I say I describe my company as honest and my values integrity, it is pretty much the same thing. But if I say actually I'm describing my organization as power driven and hungry and competitive, and the organizational values are all around collaboration, we do have an issue. So this is pretty much where we're going with this. So another thing of actually asking the question, are they being lived, has to do with, do you recognize these behaviors in your managers or leaders? Do they visibly display these? Because it could be that within your organization, certain parts of it are living them. But it's really important that that top layer is role modeling, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. If you've answered, not sure, I'm actually, I didn't come up with that much difference between my description, but I'm actually not sure if my values are being lived in the organization. One way you can actually have a look at this is through your employee engagement survey. So a tip here is to include a value index. And what this means is you'll have like one question per value, base it on a visible behavior that reflects that value. And you'll be able to start getting a small temperature check to see if it is being lived. And most of you, maybe if you already have an engagement survey, there might be one question that you can adapt to be part of that value index. So values tend to come and be created and passed down by the founder of an organization. Why? Because many times they remain current and they're part of that very basic DNA of how we do things around here. However, sometimes, and we're looking at it more and more in this world because of the massive amount of changes, transformations, and other things organizations have to go through, sometimes it's necessary to kind of take a step back and review if the values that we say we espouse are really the ones that are going to take us where we need to get to. So an example of a value that maybe some organizations are looking at is things around longevity of service. Now, it might be as the spouse value, and it might not be in the people value. But for example, they might say, actually, one of the things we're really proud of as an organization is the fact that our employees are always here. And actually, that's part of our value system. But what we're seeing more and more is that actually that longevity piece is not actually as important anymore because people are having to do career shifts and maybe move out of the organization to climb a career ladder and come back later. Maybe you have a value of actually being quite conservative, which, for example, a lot of the financial sector probably had that value at one point, but it's now having to jump from being quite a conservative organization to maybe jumping and being quite innovative, quite cutting edge. So these are things that, whether they're spouse or actual values, you really need to start looking at and evaluating if you need different ones to go forward. So let's say we decided that, I'm going to cheat on that one then. But let's say we decided we needed to create new values because maybe the ones we see don't really match where we want to go. Well, what do? I have a really simple three-step process here for you. And it's really based on that driving engagement, inclusive change aspect. So step one, we need to get insight to what our current values currently are, what's being practiced already in the organization. And some ways to do this is as easy as what I did with you guys. Ask people to describe the organization in 3 words. And this way you can gauge what that initial perspective is. Or if you want to do it less complicated and using the same language, just ask your employees, what do you think our values really are? Step 2, keep with this gathering employee voice bit and talk about your vision, where you want the organization to go, and ask what values they believe you need to believe in and practice to actually get there. So ask them, if we want to get to X, how would we need to work to get there? And there are a lot of creative ways to do this, and actually the funner you can do this, the easier it is for people to start embedding them already in their brain even before they're decided. So some suggestions are things like storyboards, digital voting, so actually using technology for our advantage, having the whole system in the room where you're actually working on it together, World cafes, post-it exercises, who doesn't love a post-it? Or simply things like actually just getting people to talk maybe around lunches or dinners. There's many ways to do this. And step 3, once you have a step 1 and step 2, choose the best fit values for your future. Again, let's think about it long term, not just the next year. So one of the hints I'm going to give you is that once you do step 1, step 2, you'll see that some of these values are probably already going to be in these descriptions, in your 3-word descriptions. So a good way is that if you do think there's one that fits, that's really nice, and that's already being lived, choose that one. Because actually sometimes you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's things that are already working within your organization, and you need to take advantage of those really positive points. So choose that one and choose 2 to 5 more. that are either being practiced or that you feel that you really, really need to work on. So sometimes they will be brand new. So yes, so choose your best values. And just to finish off with the tip, keep it simple and in a language everyone can understand. So let's say, for example, I don't know, try to think of something. If we think maybe the word innovation, now it is quite common, but maybe in the past it wouldn't have been so common. So maybe instead of having the value of innovation, we'd have a value called trying new things or experimenting with new things. So that could be just a way to keep it simple, keep it so everybody can understand it, no matter what the position or level within the organization. So when we have values, actually, this is the biggest key that I'm going to tell you for it not to be wall decoration, communication. Because values are not good if they're just in a piece of paper on a wall, if nobody knows what they are or what they mean. And you can quote me on that one. And they're really, really no good if they're just wall decoration or a mouse mail decoration or on back of business cards. They're really, really useless just like that. What we need to do is actually embed it within the organization, making sure it's a common feature in anything that we do. So also remember that even if you have co-created the values, like in the step before, it doesn't really guarantee that every single employee within your organization would have been there. They could have been off sick. And also you need to think about new employees coming in. They still need to know this information. So I call it passing the decor test. If it's more than decoration, great. So besides having them on wall, mouse, business cards, why not try some of these things? If it's a brand new values, because maybe you've gone through a big transformation and you saw you needed new ones, why not have a big launch for them? Have a big event where you tell people what they are, brand your values, make them pictures. I've seen that with a lot of organizations. It seems to be really, really a best practice now. Brand them, talk about them, do a big event where everybody's invited to. If you already have values or after this event, what can you do to kind of keep that momentum going? It's actually create a ritual within your organization. We talk a lot about rituals in organizational culture, and these are actually really important. So one of the ways you can do that is by having like a values day one day a year, or do different values day throughout the year. So maybe one day per value per quarter. And that are actually starting to form part of those rituals within the organizations. And things you can do there is just have like coffees or lunches where employees can come and talk about what the values mean to them, what they mean on a day to day, how they bring it to work, and maybe even get them to nominate people they think do them well and maybe talk about the values. So with this, celebrate and recognize people that are already role modeling the values. That is actually really important, and it's really important that we communicate this recognition. And make it part of your recruitment process and your performance management system, because it's another way of communicating that is really, really important to us. And actually always make sure you're referring back to them when you're talking about initiatives, strategy, change programs, anything really within the organization. Always make sure you're referring back to your values. And this is really one key way to always have that on the top of people's mind. Because remember, it's more important how we do things than what we do. So it's not really no use if we're all talking about these values and are really excited and we have these values and we believe in them, and then nobody is role modeling them from the top. So the most important and vital thing about living the values is seeing senior leaders role modeling them. This will give a clear message to the organization of their importance, and it will embed them. So make sure you're bridging the say-do gap. That it's not that the leaders say it's important and then go around and do something completely different. A tip for this, and to make sure this is happening within your organization, is actually add a question about role modeling in your engagement survey. Make sure you're keeping leadership accountable for the culture of the organization, because when it comes to culture, it does start from the top. So what should we watch out for? When it comes to values, I'm going to call these signs of trouble. So big warning signs to tell you that there's something that's not right. Um, so when leaders are not role modeling, kind of almost an obvious thing, but not always. It tells you that there's a bit of an issue. Counterculture is being developed within the organization. So let me strip that down because it is very OD speak. So let's say you have within the organization a very influential person or a very influential group who kind of gone negative Betty on you. They're looking at the world very gray, don't believe in the values, and are starting to behave in a way that's inappropriate. You really need to tackle that from the source and quickly. Because especially if it is somebody influential, that can actually start creating a counterculture that will start opposing the organizational one. So it's actually really important to make sure we're keeping an eye on that. Another clear indication is low engagement scores. So these are a nice little warning sign, there's something wrong, and then you can dig deeper to see if it's really down to that underlying assumptions and values piece. The other thing is high staff turnover. Because actually, especially when we're talking about the newer generations, what we want has a lot to do with how we feel about an organization. And even though a lot of people are like, maybe we still have that attitude, which is really wrong, by the way, of, oh, people should just be lucky to have a job. Wrong attitude to have. What happens is that people still have a choice. And they can choose not either not to engage with an organization, to kind of trouble before this one, or they can choose to leave. So if your individual values and the organizational values are completely opposed, believe me, it won't really matter what generation you fit into, from baby boomers to Gen Z, you will probably come to the point where you say, I can't take it any longer, I'm leaving. So that's another potential sign of trouble. Now, a lot of people don't always really realize how important values are and how important it is that a spouse and actual values work together. But it is really, really vital because going to an extreme of trouble, I want you to take a moment and think about all the organization scandals from the noughties. Enron, Lehman Brothers, just to name two. They were not an accident. They were people deviating from their values, maybe the personal and the organizational ones, and really working in this gray, shady area that made these two companies completely collapse. And that is actually one extreme example of what can happen when values are not really a focus within an organization. And also you have to think of this other thing. We have a big amount of social media. So if we're going around talking about how integrity and honesty and transparency are important for our organization, and then have a big scandal around those values, it will be all over the internet. It will go viral, and organizational reputation is on the line. So it's actually really important to start focusing on this and actually making sure that whatever you have up on the wall is actually being lived and people are actually really believing in it and seeing it from the top all the way down. So just to finish, I thought I'd summarize a couple of hints and tips here because I just talked about doom and gloom and I like to finish in a positive note. So my first thing would be find a way to measure if your values are being lived within your organization. Whether that is like the simple exercise we did at the beginning, so just getting people to describe their organization, or sticking a question in your next employee engagement survey. Find a way that you can gauge and get that temperature checked. 2, celebrate and recognize role models from the top to the very bottom. Whoever's doing it right, they don't even have to be monetary. They can be thank you cards, postcards, any type of recognition just to say these people are doing it well. Communicate them frequently. So like I said, it's no good if you never talk about them again. So make sure that you are referring back to them in everything that you do as an organization. Make sure everybody knows them and what it means to them. Because sometimes we can say things out of memory, but how well do people actually know what that means in their day-to-day work? So make sure you're making that translation piece work. And make them part of the employee life cycle, like we said, from recruitment to onboarding, making sure everybody that's new to the organization understands. making sure that that cultural fit piece runs on through the employee life cycle. So while they're there, making sure we are engaging them with our values, and also when they're gone, just checking to make sure at exit that this was not one of the issues. So that's all for today, and thank you for listening. I hope you got a lot of value out of that. Values is definitely something that's very close to my heart because I've been in both sides of the coin. I've been in organizations that practice them very, very well, and I've been in organizations that their values could just be written in pencil and have like scrub marks on them because they really weren't being lived. So yes, hopefully that will give you a couple of ideas of how to measure if they are being lived, but also a couple of ideas on what you need to do. So connect with us on Twitter at SustainableOD. Connect with us on LinkedIn. Just look for Change Differently. And if you do want to look at the blog spot, the blog is actually on the Change Differently website as well. But look for Sustainable OD on WordPress and you'll find my personal blog. We are taking a summer break from webinars. And this is basically so I can gather a lot of feedback to see what's been of value to you that have been listening. So I will be sending a survey out. But thank you so much for listening, whether it was live or on the recording. And I hope to talk to you very, very soon. Thank you.